Welcome to this new podcast series, Judicial Ways of Working, which is produced by the Institute of Advanced Legal Studies at the University of London. My name is Carl Stychin, and I'm the director of the Institute. The aim of this series is to explore how members of the judiciary are working differently in the circumstances of the global pandemic that we face. I'm delighted to welcome to this podcast Justice Richard Humphreys of the High Court of Ireland. Justice Humphreys has been a member of the High Court since 2015. He holds a PhD from Trinity College Dublin, and he lectured in law at University College Dublin and University College Cork, as well as part-time at Trinity and at the National University of Ireland, Galway. He became a practicing barrister in 1997 and senior counsel in 2009, and he's a member of the Irish, Northern Irish, and English Bar Middle Temple. Justice Humphreys is also a prolific author, and his latest book is Beyond the Border, The Good Friday Agreement and Irish Unity After Brexit, which is published in 2018 by Marion Press. Welcome to the podcast, Richard.
Well, thank you very much, Carl, and can I congratulate you and IELTS for all your great work, both in general and indeed during this pandemic. It's great that you're taking the initiative to do this podcast series.
Well, thank you very much for that and for joining us. Maybe we could just begin. If you can give us a little description, a snapshot of what your everyday professional life as a judge was like before the pandemic, if you can remember what it was like.
Well,
how did you work?
The High Court is divided into different subject areas, so you're assigned a given area for any particular court term. So my day job, if you like, was the asylum and immigration list. So I was managing that list for the past while. In fact, we inherited quite a backlog, so we got that down to manageable numbers. So I had a certain amount of spare time and a bit of slack in the system, which is something that's always good to have. So then on my kind of off days, I would fill in doing general normal judicial review and non-jury cases, which are normally like debt issues with financial institutions, that sort of stuff. So the bulk of the job was in court, and then there's a certain amount of paperwork, tidying up judgments for publication. I've managed to cut down on the number of reserved judgments fairly dramatically by trying to do as many extempore as possible, which I would strongly recommend. That was the historical tradition. The Victorians were excellent at that, as they were on so many things, and it's a tradition I'd like to see brought back in with a bit more vigor, because it provides an immediate result to everybody. You don't have to wait for the result, and then the judge can kind of tidy up the judgment a little bit and publish a more polished version a little bit later, but at least everyone knows where they stand.
And to what extent was the judicial role in Ireland, your role, was it enabled by technology, and in what ways?
Well, the kind of remote technology we're seeing now only really came in certain types of cases, like certain criminal cases, bail applications, and so forth. But for your regular common or garden court application, it wasn't really a big thing. I personally used a computer on the bench. Some judges do. I think most don't. Most probably stick with the tried and tested pen and notebook. But I find, going back to the extempore judgments, I find the computer was much more valuable if you were planning to give an extempore judgment. It's actually quite hard to organize your swirling mass of thoughts just using the pen. When you're able to kind of type it out and reorganize it, you can give the extempore ruling much more easily. So I was totally addicted to the computer on the bench, but that's as far as the technology had got pre the pandemic.
Okay. So obviously, we've all our lives have changed. No one's quite sure if they've changed forever or how they will have changed in the long term. But at the moment, how has your work changed as a result of the pandemic. What are you doing now?
Well, the reason I've got a tie on is I'm actually going into court today for the first time in 6 weeks. In my case, we still have some limited physical sittings, so I'm doing one of those this morning. There have been a few kind of procedural changes. First of all, consent orders can now be made by email, so the parties just send in the order and consent to the other side, and they get their order by return. And it doesn't have the same degree of judicial oversight. Now, most of the time, 99% of the time, judges aren't going to interfere with the consent order anyway. So, second thing that's changed is judgments are now being delivered electronically rather than in court. So that's another change. But the change that hasn't happened in Ireland is the online hearings to any great extent. There have been experiments and trials, but nothing really has happened on a sort of widespread basis. And nor indeed have people kind of taken up the idea of hearings on the papers either. So I think, yeah, that aspect of the story has still to play out as far as Ireland is concerned anyhow. Essentially what's happened is when you say, what am I doing now? Very good question. Not as much as I was doing. I'm doing the courts are still there for physical hearings, but on a much reduced and socially distanced basis. But I think there is going to be some electronic development reasonably soon, I'm hoping.
Okay, so there are plans in development to try to move towards more remote working?
There are. Now, as distinct from, say, in England, the thing was quite bottom up, where individual judges and individual litigants came up with their own ideas. And then judges held remote hearings using a variety of platforms. Skype for Business and Zoom were the two that got a fair bit of mention in terms of what I was hearing, but you'd be closer to that. In Ireland, it's not so much a bottom up as maybe a top down thing. The court service, which is the statutory body that manages the business of the courts, has been trying to develop a sort of universal technical solution. I'd say they've organised trials of that, but it hasn't really hit the High Court as yet. But I mean, I'm hoping that will happen reasonably soon. But it's more kind of one size fits all kind of thing rather than the let a thousand flowers bloom approach of England. Right. So you can take your pick as to which is better, I suppose.
It sounds as though the pandemic, given that the courts have slowed down, there are implications for access to justice. And I wondered if that's something that you've thought about, your perception of the impact on access to justice and any concerns you have about that.
Sure. No, you're absolutely right. That is a definite issue. I mean, there's a lot of issues about this thing that one didn't immediately kind of see. Tied into access to justice then is the payment for the lawyers, for example, because say you had a hearing on the papers, there's no actual physical hearing, so therefore what happens to the instruction fee and the brief fee, which would be really the meat of the payment for any given case. Likewise, the access to justice. Now, the court presidents here in Ireland issued a practice direction saying that it would be sufficient to invite a journalist, say, on the call if you're having a remote hearing, or have a journalist in court if there was a kind of a very, very limited sort of access of people to the courtroom. I mean, that's definitely a lot better than no public access, but we have a constitutional requirement for justice being done in public here in Ireland. So there's less flexibility for the legislature, say, to provide for exceptions to that. But even having one journalist on the line or in court is something less than a 100% perfect solution. I mean, ultimately, if you had virtual hearings, you'd have to provide full access to justice. You'd have to either live stream it or have it in an open, have it being broadcast in an open courtroom that people could come into. Now, live streaming would be a problem with a lot of cases, certainly with my asylum cases, because there's a certain amount of redaction that goes on. I think it's more or less impossible to live stream a case where redaction is required. So that would kind of rule out quite a number of cases, not all by any means. No, but I think you're absolutely right that access to justice is going to be one of the elements that's going to have to be sorted out before we can really say we've solved the problem of remote access hearings.
So would you be averse to moving more in that direction? And would there actually be benefits as well that you can see?
Well, I think anything that gives you more options is a benefit. So I think if the court had a sort of a palette of possibilities to choose from in a given case, hearings on the papers in judicial review is there in our rules of court at the moment. It's just not actually taken up in practice. So, it would be good if you could add another option, maybe of remote hearings. I mean, it might allow, I can see different possibilities. For instance, it might allow urgent cases to be heard in a quicker time frame where you could slot them in outside of regular court hours by doing them remotely. I mean, I think one of the problems with the proposed Irish solution, as I understand it, but now I don't have as I say, it's yet to hit the front lines, if you know what I mean. But one of the problems is I think the courtrooms have to be set up with a certain amount of technology as well, so that somebody can coordinate the whole thing. And not all of the courtrooms are. So you could have a situation where there isn't a courtroom available and somebody wants an urgent hearing. So it would be good then to have, going forward, in a more kind of, on a more general basis, to have the option of having a remote hearing, maybe outside of regular court hours, or as an alternative. So look, Carl, anything that gives the court options, keeps the court's options open, I'm totally in favour of and can only be to the good. And likewise, the hearings on the papers, that should be opened up as well. I don't want to do lawyers out of their well-deserved fees or anything like that, but there must be some solution as to how they can get a proper payment and the matter can be heard quickly, maybe by unconventional means if that's appropriate. But I don't see any of that completely replacing the physical hearing either, though. When that's possible, there will always be a role for that, I think.
But it does sound, assuming that we go back to some form of normal, or as people like to say, a new normal. It sounds to me like you're saying that there are lessons that can be learned from this time as to how we resolve disputes, issues in courts.
Yeah, no, I think so. I mean, I think something I personally feel quite strongly about is justice delayed being justice denied. And I think the traditional court processes just have a potential to act as a sort of a drag on the progress of a case. So I think anything that, certainly where cases with some degree of urgency are concerned, anything that can inject a bit of speed and inject a bit of movement into the case has got to be good. So, I do see the expansion of the electronic options as definitely a positive and something that will have a resonance even when we get to the new normal.
So, am I right in thinking that you would characterize yourself as a modernizer in how courts operate in Ireland?
Well, I'm not sure I want to put myself forward under any particular slogan or banner, but what I would say is the courts have to be modernizers and judges sort of generally have to be modernizers. And, generally the one thing I'd say about the legal profession is it is adaptable. It has survived a long time through adaptation. The adaptations aren't always as rapid as you might like, but law isn't, I mean, the answers to legal problems are not generally to be found in the back of dusty law reports. Just because somebody said something 30 years ago doesn't make it unchallengeable. Law is about answers to society's problems right now, and society changes, and therefore law has to change to meet the particular needs we have at the moment, both the substantive law and the techniques and the processes and the methodology and the procedures of doing law. So, law is substantive law and the court service, the court system, judges, I think, almost by definition, are modernizers. Maybe some people are more impatient with the degree of modernization than others, but certainly law has to keep pace with society, otherwise it's not doing its job.
And finally, on a personal note, we're all working at home. And I wonder if, and some people are finding it more challenging than others, and people are obviously differently positioned in terms of how easy that is for them. I wonder if you have any advice, any words of wisdom for those who are finding it a challenge to work effectively at home.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm not sure I'd want to call it wisdom, but I would say that there are two kinds of lockdown going on at the moment. There's ones for people with small children, and there's lockdowns for everybody else. And everyone else, I think, has the potential to have a reasonably good time if they focus on things they enjoy. There's lots of free online courses. There's chances to ring your friends, catch up on your reading, catch up on your Netflix subscription. People with small children certainly have the worst of it. My only advice to them is just make sure they ask for what they need and can't be expected to take on impossible burdens of working from home, which is obviously going to be difficult and is going to be interrupted, or at least have the potential to be interrupted the whole time. So be good to yourself. Yeah. Seneca says the man who is a friend to himself will surely be a friend to all mankind. So that's good advice under any circumstances.
Well, that's a great way to finish off. And I want to thank you very much, Justice Richard Humphreys, for sharing your insights on judicial ways of working. And to all of our viewers, I hope that you've enjoyed the podcast, and I look forward to being with you again soon for another episode in our series.
Thank you, Carl. Thanks again.